Hi, I am Miguel Paredes, and last week I uploaded a video where I made a couple of Growlithe figures, and I thought that for today the most logical thing to do was to make its evolution, so let's begin. As always, the first step was to draw a guide to keep the size and proportions of the figure under control, and then I started to work on the torso. So first I made this mini torso thing out of aluminum foil and wrapped it in a thick layer of clay, and once I was happy with its shape, I inserted a wire at one end and hung it up while it dried. Then I made a little ball for the head and also left it drying. And once I was done with that, I started to work on the tail. I decided to make it in two parts, as I felt that this way it would be easier for me. At this point I wasn't thinking about making too complex or detailed pieces. I was interested in making simple and easy pieces that would serve as a good base to build the rest of the figure, and once I was happy with the results, I left them drying too.
The next day,
with the torso and the head completely hardened, I attached both pieces together with the help of this little wire, which got wrapped with epoxy in order to give it more stability. Then I just needed to add a layer of clay over top, and we're ready to work on his face. While all that was drying, I made the front legs, which were not that complicated. Yeah, they were pretty easy to make. On the other hand, the back legs were somewhat complicated. I started by making a little ball, which I pinched little by little until I got the shape that I wanted. It is worth mentioning that I made the balls for both legs at the same time. That's because in their ball form, it is easier to keep under control, that their size is the same. At this point, the main shape of the body was finished, so I decided to work on the finer details, starting with the mane, and fuck this fucking mane. Arcanine is one of my favorite Pokemon, and that's one of the main reasons I decided to make a figure of him, but I also choose him because it's not a Pokemon that I find particularly complex. Basically it is a dog, lion, tiger thing, I don't know. Well, the fact is that at first sight it didn't seem to be a very complicated challenge, but this mane was extremely tedious. I wasn't planning to take so long in this part, but I just kept adding and adding these, I don't know, clumps of fur. I completely lost the notion of reality while working on this. It would have been less tedious to watch a PowerPoint presentation about how to grow grass. But after surviving that hell, I was able to work on the fangs, the nose, and that fur that's on the legs, which was also tedious and more time consuming than it should have been. Not as much of the mane, of course, but yeah, it also took some time. At this point he was looking pretty cool and all, but he was still missing his tail. So I took these two pieces that were still hanging and glued both with the help of a piece of wire, clay, and well, super glue. Then I blended the seam with clay and water. And with the main shape of the tail finished, I started to add some details to make it look less dull and boring. And now all that is left to do with the sculpting part is to attach the tail and make his two little ears. And finally we're on to the painting. So I started by mixing some brown with a good amount of white to get this light beige tone for the tail, the mane, and the fur on the legs. Then I painted the orange areas with orange paint because these areas were orange, so using orange paint seemed like the most logical thing to do. I was not going to use green paint to paint the orange areas, so I used orange paint. And then I painted the finer details like the black stripes on the body and his face. With the figure pretty much finished, it was time to make the base, and well, the thing with the base is that my original intention was to make something like this, you know, like Arcanine standing on a rock looking at the distance or something like that, but then I thought maybe I could make the base a little bit bigger. Maybe I could fill the extra space with some small Pokemon, maybe a rock here and there, a little bit of grass here and there, and one thing led to another, and this ended up becoming a mini mini diorama. And it went from being something like this to something like this. So first I mixed the brown paint with clay and made the lower part of the base and the rock that would hold Arcanine, and with a piece of sandpaper I gave them some texture. For the grass I used dark green clay, and with the first pointy tool I found I gave it some texture by making circular movements all over the surface. From time to time I applied a little bit of water on the clay because when it is moistened the texturing is easier and it ends up looking better. With the stone that would hold Arcanine and the lower part of the base finished, it was time to put them together. As you can see, I used 2 wires and a good amount of super glue to ensure that they would hold well, and as a last step I put another layer of grass on the top of the base as I needed fresh surface to mark Arcanine's feet to know exactly where I was going to put him. The base was almost finished and I was quite happy with how it looked up to that point. I just needed to give it some life with a bit of paint. I really like to highlight the sculpted details and enhance those textures that at first might look kinda flat and almost unnoticeable. So for this I started by giving the rocks a wash with black paint, followed by a quick dry brush with grey paint. For the grass there was no need to apply a wash, its base tone was already dark enough, so I just dry brushed it. I like yellowish greens or greenish yellows, so that was the tone I used. Finally, I attached Arcanine to the base in the same way I attached the tail to his body. So I carved 2 holes in the base, put some screws in the legs, coated them with epoxy, and that was it! As I said, at some point I decided to add a few extra Pokemon, so I placed the 2 Growlithes from the last video in the front corner of the base. I also added a couple of Oddish and an Eevee, which were quite easy to make. The idea was to make small and simple Pokemon. I wasn't going to decorate the base with Groudon surfing on Kyogre or something like that. And that's it! And you know what? It was a fun figure to make, for the most part. And I am happy I made the decision to not only make Arcanine but also the other Pokemon and create this little diorama. Okay, so did you like this video? Did you like this figure? If so, let me know in the comments. Leave a like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. Yeah, okay, that's it. Bye!